This film shows you how to install and maintain Model 760 Jake brake on the Detroit Diesel Series 60. Heed the cautions and warnings in this film and in the manual. They are indicated by these symbols. Caution, all Series 60 12.7-liter engines with serial number 6R4455 or higher will have the correct engine parts for engine brake installation. See the introduction section of the installation manual for additional application information. Use common sense for your personal safety when working on the engine. Always wear eye protection. Be sure you have the correct model Jake brake, Model 760. The serial number is located on top of each housing. Also be sure you have the following special tools: a 15mm 12-point socket wrench, a 12mm 12-point socket wrench, a 3/16-inch hex key socket wrench, an expander tool, Kentmore part number J37347, an ejector height gauge, Kentmore part number J35637. You also need the Jacobs installation kit. Parts included in this kit are 3 housings, support bars, cap screws, clutch switch, dash control, module and harnesses, plus customer information group and Model 760 Jake brake installation manual, and the Detroit Diesel Series 60 engine service manual. There are 3 styles of valve covers for the Series 60 engine: the current aluminum style 2-piece valve cover, the earlier aluminum style 2-piece valve cover, and the fiberglass 1-piece valve cover. However, the aluminum style 2-piece valve cover cap may require modification at the breather pipe location inside for the Jake brake housing clearance. We will refer to this modification at the end of the installation of the engine brake. All Detroit Diesel Series 60 12.7-liter engines with serial number 6R4455 or higher are Jake brake ready. For engines with serial numbers lower than 6R4455, you need a non-Jake ready engine brake kit. This will be covered towards the end of this program. Now let's turn to engine preparation. First, steam clean the engine and remove the engine parts necessary for access to the engine overhead. Now remove the valve cover cap. The cover cap on this engine is aluminum, so you do not have to remove the cover base. But for the purpose of this demonstration, we have removed it for better visibility. On the Jake ready engines, it's not necessary to readjust the engine overhead. The purpose for showing the Detroit Diesel Series 60 valve and injector adjustments is to inform mechanics not familiar with the Series 60 engine, and to have this procedure shown before the Model 760 Jake brake housings are installed on the engine. For non-Jake ready engines, it's necessary to readjust the overhead, as new engine components will be required. The component changes necessary will be covered at the end of this program. The next section covers valve clearance and injector height adjustments. Accurate adjustments of the clearance between the valve buttons at the end of the rocker arm and the tip of the intake and exhaust valves is important to maximize Jake brake performance and economical engine operation. Likewise, injector height should be measured and adjusted if necessary. Intake and exhaust valve clearance is adjusted by means of an adjusting set screw and lock nut located beneath the valve at the end of the rocker arm. To adjust fuel injector height, use the Kentmore injector height gauge, part number J35637. Note the gauge hole in the fuel injector body. In the method we will now show, you will have to bar the engine over only 2 complete revolutions. You will adjust 3 cylinders, either valves or injectors, on each revolution. Be sure to first disconnect the starting power for the engine. Do this by removing a battery cable. Do not simply rely on turning off the ignition. First, let's summarize the steps, then we'll take it step by step. You will be using this timing circle chart as a guide. It's shown in the installation manual. Always bar the engine over in the direction of rotation. stopping when one of the fuel injectors has just begun its downward stroke. Note the number of this cylinder and refer to the timing circle chart. You can start the adjusting with any cylinder, but be sure to complete the circle. Adjust all 4 valves, 2 intake and 2 exhaust, at this cylinder position and set the fuel injector height on the companion cylinder. Never set the valves and injector of the same cylinder at the same time. Continue around the circle until all 6 sets of valves and fuel injectors have been adjusted. Here's the process step by step. To adjust the intake valves, insert an 0.008 feeler gauge between the tip of the valve stem and the valve button at the end of the rocker arm. Loosen the lock nut and turn the adjusting screw until the feeler gauge produces an even or smooth pull between the valve stem and the valve button. Torque the lock nut to 35 foot-pounds. Remove the feeler gauge, then reinsert it to be sure the adjustment did not change when you tighten the lock nut. Readjust the gap if necessary. Adjust the 2 exhaust valves the same way, but use a 0.20 feeler gauge. Now refer to the timing circle chart. Find the cylinder number for which you just adjusted the valves. The number in parentheses directly below is the cylinder for which you now adjust the fuel injector height. In this demonstration, cylinder number 4 was just adjusted. The chart says to now adjust the fuel injector height for cylinder number 3. Place the tip of the height gauge in the hole in the fuel injector body with the flat of the gauge towards the fuel injector plunger. Be sure the height gauge seats on the machine surface with the tip in the gauge hole. Dirt or other foreign material in the hole or on the machine surface may prevent accurate setting of the injector height. Loosen the fuel injector rocker arm lock nut. Then turn the adjusting set screw until the flag of the gauge, that is the extended part of the gauge, will just pass over the top of the injector follower. You will develop an accurate feel for this, and your objective is to adjust all 6 injectors to the same feel. Torque the lock nut to 35 foot-pounds. Then recheck the adjustment with the height gauge and readjust as necessary. Now bar the engine over until the injector in the next cylinder in the timing circle chart begins its downward movement. Repeat the adjusting process starting with the valves, continuing until you have adjusted all the valves and fuel injectors. To check tolerances, consult the component, checking dimension, and setting chart in the manual. Now let's return to the steps for installation of the Jake brake. Before the support bars and engine brake housings can be installed, the under valve cover wiring harness must be installed first. Remove the mounting flange cover for the electronic unit injector harness. Insert the blue wire and the yellow wire through 2 of the access holes in the grommet located at the rear of the cylinder head. Caution, use care. Once these wires are inserted through the grommet, they cannot be removed because of the terminal locking tangs. So remember to do it right the first time. Lay the harness alongside the injector wire harness. Pick up the end connector on the outboard side of the standoff at the rear of the cylinder head. Note, however, that if the harness for the Jake brake solenoid valves was factory installed by Detroit Diesel, the wires are red rather than yellow, and the harness installation is not necessary. Insert the yellow wire from the harness into the pin housing on the same side as the yellow wire on the solenoid harness. Then insert the blue wire into the other hole. Then install the pin housing onto the solenoid harness. It fits onto the connector in only one direction. Push the housing until it clicks. Note the Detroit Diesel factory installed harnesses do not have the pin housing and connector. Caution, the wires must be connected as instructed. If the wires bend all the electrical terminals at the injectors upwards about 90 degrees to provide clearance for the Jake brake housings. Caution, then roll the harness down against the injectors and add loom as needed for support bar installation. Next, remove the 3 bearing cap bolts on locations 2, 4, and 6. These bolts are not to be used for installing the Jake brake. Discard after removal. Always blow out the oil from the bolt holes, cam bearings, and bosses for the support bars. Please use care when doing this, and remember to be sure to wear eye protection. Warning, eye protection must be worn while blowing the oil. Personal injury may result if safety glasses are not worn. Caution, attach a length of tubing to a blowgun nozzle to blow out the oil from the bolt holes. Cover the holes with hand towels to minimize oil spray. Removing the oil from the bolt holes prevents the engine block from cracking when tightening the bolts later. The next step is to install the Jake brake housings, but first you must install the support bars with the out stamp towards the turbocharger side of the engine. Then place the 3 Jake brake housings over the rocker shafts with the solenoid valves towards the camshaft side of the engine. Be sure the housings do not interfere with the wiring harness and align to the support bars. Apply International Compound number 2 to the threads and to the underside of the head of the housing hold-down cap screws. Install washers on the 4 3/4 inch long cap screws and insert the screws into the brake housings on the exhaust manifold side. There are 2 such screws per housing. Install a pilot bolt for housing alignment on the camshaft side of the engine. Next, torque the 6 cap screws on the exhaust manifold side of the engine to 40 foot-pounds and remove the pilot bolt. Then install a washer on the 4 3/8 inch long cap screw and insert it into the brake housing on the camshaft side. There is only 1 such screw per housing. Tighten the Jake brake hold-down cap screws in the following sequence. Torque the 3 cap screws on the camshaft side of the engine to 40 foot-pounds. Now repeat the torque sequence, but torque all the cap screws to 80 foot-pounds. The next procedure is adjustment of the slave piston. Caution, the slave piston adjustment procedure must be strictly followed. Failure to use the proper adjustment procedure will result in poor Jake brake performance and/or serious engine damage. You must make the adjustment with the engine stopped and cold. The oil temperature must be 140 degrees Fahrenheit or below. Also, the exhaust valves on the cylinder to be adjusted must be in the closed position, that is, with the rocker arm loose. First, note the leveling screw and the crosshead member of the slave piston assembly. Back out the leveling screw until the end of the screw is beneath the surface of the crosshead. Then place a 20 thousandths feeler gauge between the solid side of the slave piston crosshead, that is, the side without the leveling screw, and the exhaust rocker arm adjusting screw. Now turn the slave piston adjusting screw clockwise until you feel a light drag on the feeler gauge. Holding the screw in this position, torque the lock nut to 25 foot-pounds. Note that the slave piston adjusting screws are reset screws. You must not disassemble them. For slave piston adjustment on 11.1-liter Detroit diesel engines, refer to the Model 760 installation manual. Next, follow the same procedure to set a 20 thousandths clearance between the slave piston leveling screw and the rocker arm adjusting screw. As before, torque the lock nut to 25 foot-pounds. Repeat these same steps for the slave piston adjustment on each of the remaining cylinders. Rotate the engine when necessary to put the exhaust valves in the closed position to make the adjustment. The purpose of routing and clipping wires to the support bars is to keep them from rubbing between the support bars and the housing. Now connect the 3 wires to the solenoid valves as follows. The short yellow wire to the rear housing. The blue wire to the center housing. And the long yellow wire to the front housing. Store any excess wire along the injector wire harness and secure with plastic wire ties. The lower cover has been reinstalled for engine brake operation check. The next section of this film shows you how to check the operation of the Model 760 Jake brake. You are again reminded to be careful. Warning, wear eye protection and do not expose your face over the engine area. Take precautions to prevent oil leakage onto the engine. It is important for you to keep in mind that whenever the engine is running with the valve covers removed, oil splashing in the engine area could cause personal injury. The first step in checking Jake brake operation is to bleed the brake housings. Start the engine and allow it to run for a few minutes. Then depress and release the Jake brake solenoid armature several times to allow the housing to be filled with oil. Watch the master piston to be sure it is moving down onto the roller in the injector rocker arm. Check each of the 3 Jake brake housings to be sure each is functioning properly. Once you are satisfied, shut down the engine. The next section of this film shows you how to install the clutch switch. Mount the switch in the most convenient or accessible location possible, which may be under the floor wheel well, in the area of the bell housing, under the dash, or the engine firewall. After mounting the switch bracket, install the switch with the actuator arm in contact with the clutch pedal arm or other clutch member. Adjust it by moving the switch along the mounting bracket. The tip of the actuator arm should be deflected about 1 to 1.5 inches when the clutch is fully engaged. The switch should click in during the free play motion of the clutch pedal before clutch disengagement occurs. Here is how you install the dash module. Locate an area on the dash for the dash module and drill a 2-inch hole. Install the module using the bracket and 2 wing nuts. Caution, do not over-tighten the wing nuts. Switch failure will result if you do. Control module installation. Using 2 self-tapping screws, mount the control module inside the cab so that the ribbon harness will reach the dash module. Caution, be sure to secure the control module properly. Do not tie wrap the module behind the dash. If you do, the control module will be stressed and failure will result. This control schematic diagram appears in your Model 760 Jake brake installation manual. Study it as you proceed with the wiring. If your installation is using the two optional dash switches instead of the dash module, connect them as shown in the wiring diagram in the installation manual. Note that the use of these switches eliminates the diagnostic troubleshooting feature of the standard circuit. Connect the wire harness, part number 015708, to the weather pack connector on the control module. Now connect wire harness part number 015709 to the control module. Connect the green wire to a good ground. The green and yellow wire is for possible future use. For now, connect it to the same ground with the green wire. Warning: it is very important that the green wire be connected to a good ground. Attach it to a chassis bolt, not a cab bolt or a dash screw. A poor ground will cause intermittent jake brake operation and damage to the control module. Connect the red wire to a 10-amp circuit breaker that is controlled by the ignition key. For standard transmissions, the blue and white wire are not used. Insulate the ends and store the wire. For automatic transmissions, connect the wire to the ATEC wire number 211. The orange wire is also for future use. Insulate and store it. Connect the white wire and the black wire to the clutch switch. Connect the dark blue wire and the yellow wire to the shroud, which connects to the solenoid external harness, part number 014827. As you recall, you installed that harness earlier as the first step in preparing the engine. To complete the installation, be sure to connect the brown wire of the harness to the DDEC ECM wire 508. Next, we check the control system. To check the system, turn the ignition switch back on, but do not start the engine. The red light on the dash module indicates that the control module is off. To turn the control module on, press the on-off button on the dash module. The red light goes off and the green light in the lower quadrant comes on. This indicates that only the center housing of the jake brake is operational. That is, only 2 cylinders are available to provide retarding power. Pressing the medium button makes its green light go on. Now the center housing is not operational, but the front and rear housings, 4 cylinders, are. Pressing the high button brings on the high green light to show all 6 cylinders are operational to provide maximum retarding power. To put the control module in the electronic diagnostic mode, press the high button for at least 5 seconds. All 4 lights will start blinking. When they stop blinking, the module is in the diagnostic mode and the jake brake solenoids are disabled. Now start the engine. Rev up the engine and release the throttle. The red light will come on, indicating that the DDEC ECM is sending the correct signal for the retarder to turn on. All 4 small lights on mean that you have proper jake brake control operation. When you depress the clutch switch, the small light in the high sector goes off. This completes your control system check. Turn off the jake brake by pushing the on-off button, then switch off the engine. 760 electronic control module. Quick reference for diagnostics and troubleshooting. When the on-off indicator light is illuminated, there is a retarder enable signal coming from the ECM wire 508. When the low indicator light is illuminated, the green-yellow wire is grounded. When the medium indicator light is illuminated, the orange wire is not grounded. When the high indicator light is illuminated, the clutch pedal is not depressed. Having completed your check, you may now install the aluminum valve cover cap. If you are using either of the other 2 cover caps, refer to the manual for instructions. When you put the valve cover cap on the base, check for any interference between the front jake brake housing and the cover cap at the breather pipe location. If interference exists, take the cover cap off and grind it per Detroit diesel instructions. Insert the 8 screws. Torque the 8 screws to only 10 foot-pounds in the sequence shown in this diagram in your manual. Then repeat this tightening sequence, torquing each screw to 20 foot-pounds. The Jake brake is now ready for service. To complete the installation, be sure to fill out the Model 760 warranty card. The next section of this film shows you how to perform maintenance on the Model 760 Jake brake. The Jake brake is relatively trouble-free. It needs little maintenance. However, inspections and part replacements are needed from time to time. The procedures discussed now will help you keep the Jake brake in top condition. You will see here how to properly remove, clean, and reinstall Jake brake components. Use an OSHA-approved solvent when washing parts. Be sure to coat parts with clean engine oil when reinstalling them. Warning, never remove any Jake brake component with the engine running. Personal injury may result. This is a diagram of Model 760 Jake brake. It appears in the installation manual. Have your manual handy as you perform maintenance, as this diagram will be helpful. The two control valves are the first items on the Jake brake that you remove for maintenance. Warning, remove control valve covers carefully. Control valve covers are under load from the control valve springs. Remove with care to avoid personal injury, and always wear safety glasses. For simplicity, only one control valve is highlighted on this diagram. You start by removing the control valve cover, which is held in place by the retaining ring shown at the top of the diagram. Press down on the control valve cover with a rod or other blunt tool to relieve spring pressure and remove the retaining ring using retaining ring pliers. You may have to rotate the ring to bring its ears into position. Now slowly let up your pressure on the control valve cover until you feel the spring pressure relieved. Then remove the cover, the two control valve springs, and the collar. Using needle nose pliers, reach into the bore and grasp the stem of the control valve and pull the valve out. We are now finishing the removal of the second control valve. Wash the valve with OSHA-approved cleaning solvent. Then push a wire through the hole in the base of the valve to the distance required to ensure that the ball inside moves freely. The ball should lift with light pressure on the wire. If it is stuck, the control valve should be replaced. Now dry the valve with compressed air and wipe it clean with a paper towel or lint-free shop towel. Never use rags, as they may leave lint and other residue which can interfere with control valve operation. Thoroughly clean the control valve bore in the Jake brake housing, also using clean paper towels or lint-free shop towels. Lubricate the control valve with clean oil. Then, holding it by its stem, let it drop into its bore. If binding occurs and it does not drop in smoothly, the control valve should be replaced. Lubricate the collar, then making sure that the longer sleeve area on the collar is up, insert it into the bore. Insert the two springs and place the cover on the top spring. Then slide the ring over the rod and press the rod down on the cover until you can insert the retaining ring. Now repeat the same procedure for the other control valve in the housing. This completes work on the control valves. Next, we'll go over maintenance of the slave piston adjusting screws, called resets on the Model 760 Jake brake. This is the component shown highlighted here. Note that it is designated with the word reset. The first step is to loosen the lock nut. Then back the adjusting screw out of the housing. Clean the screw in an approved cleaning solvent. Then inspect it. Actuate the plunger on the bottom of the screw using a small screwdriver. The plunger should protrude from the bottom of the screw. It should have light spring pressure when depressed and should move freely. Also check the retaining ring to be sure it is fully engaged in its groove. Caution, do not adjust or tamper with the adjusting screw assembly. Engine damage could result. Caution, do not use auto lash adjusting screws or solid screws in Model 760 Jake brakes. The Model 760 slave piston adjusting screws, reset, are not the same as those used in other Jake brake models. For proper identification, refer to the Model 760 parts manual. The part number is stamped on the top of the adjusting screw. Use of other than Jacob's recommended parts may result in engine damage. Be sure to use the correct replacement. It looks like the one on the left, not like the Jacob's auto lash screw on the right. When you inspect the adjusting screws, if you find any defect, replace the entire assembly. Lubricate and reinstall the adjusting screw. Then snug down the lock nut. You will make the final adjustment using the adjusting screw when the engine brake housing is reinstalled on the engine. Your next step in Model 760 Jake brake maintenance is the solenoid valve. It's shown highlighted in this diagram. First, using a 7/8-inch socket wrench, unscrew the solenoid valve. Remove and discard the 3 rubber seal rings. If the lower ring stayed in the bottom of the solenoid bore, remove it with a piece of wire. Caution, do not disassemble or tamper with the solenoid valve itself. Engine damage could result. Wash out the solenoid valve with an approved cleaning solvent. Use a brush to clean the oil screen. After brushing the screen clean, dry the valve with compressed air, and be sure you are wearing eye protection. Clean out the solenoid valve bore in the housing using clean paper towels or lint-free shop towels. Never use rags, as they may leave lint and residue which can plug the oil passageways. Lubricate a new set of 3 solenoid seal rings. Install the upper and center rings on the solenoid body. Insert the lower seal ring into the bottom of the solenoid bore. Use a wire to make sure it's seated properly. Be sure the other 2 seals on the valve body are in proper position. Then carefully screw the solenoid valve into the housing without disturbing the positions of the seals. Bring the valve up snug, being careful not to twist the seals. Torque the valve to 4 to 6 foot-pounds. This completes solenoid valve maintenance. Now we turn to maintenance of the 2 master pistons. The master piston and its components are highlighted here. Maintenance is fairly simple. Just remove the screws, washers, and the master piston return springs from the brake housing. Then pull out the master piston. Use needle nose pliers if you can't get it out with your fingers. Clean the piston in an approved solvent, then inspect it for excessive wear or damage. Replace it with a new piston if necessary. Lubricate the master piston and reinsert it in its bore. Then place the spring in position, making sure its legs are centered around the piston boss. With the washer on the screw, bring the screw up snug. Torque the screw to 100 inch-pounds. Then repeat the procedure for the other master piston. The slave piston is the next part of the Jake brake you should work on. The parts are highlighted here. Turn the housing upside down and using a hex wrench back out the screw. The screw is under spring tension when you first loosen it, so be careful. Remove the spring that retains the slave piston assembly and set it and the spring aside. Remove the crosshead, loosen the leveling screw lock nut, and back out the leveling screw from the crosshead. Then remove the slave piston from its bore. Inspect all the components for excessive wear or damage and replace parts if necessary. Lubricate the parts and reinstall them, beginning with the slave piston. Be sure to install the crosshead with the leveling screw towards the center of the housing and the part number away from the housing so that it is visible. Install the slave piston assembly retaining spring with the ends over the crosshead. Insert the screw through the center part of the spring, engage the threads, and tighten the screw snug. Finish tightening the screw down with the hex wrench, torquing it to 15 foot-pounds. Recheck to make certain the spring is centered over the slave piston crosshead. After you perform the same maintenance on the other slave piston, your work on the two slave pistons is completed. The accumulator is the next item in the maintenance program. Caution! The accumulator spring is under strong compression. Use caution when removing the retaining ring and cover. Wear safety glasses. If the spring is accidentally discharged, personal injury may result. The accumulator, its piston, and other components are highlighted here. The first step involves removing the spring. While pressing down on the accumulator cover with a rod to relieve the spring pressure on the retaining ring, remove the ring using retaining ring pliers. Now slowly let up your pressure on the accumulator cover until you feel the spring pressure relieved. Then remove the cover and the spring. Use a magnet to remove the piston from the accumulator bore. Inspect the piston and other parts for wear or damage. Replace them if necessary. Lubricate the parts and reassemble them, beginning by inserting the piston in the bore, then the spring. Now press down on the cover and insert the retaining ring. Work carefully to prevent the rod from sliding off the cover and possibly causing release of spring tension. Be sure to rotate the ring about 90 degrees after you insert it. This completes the work on the accumulator. The final item of maintenance on the Jake brake itself is the ball check valve. It's on the front underside of the brake housing, in this location. Use a hex wrench to unscrew the plug and remove the spring and the ball by letting them drop into your hand. Check the parts and replace any showing excessive wear. Then lubricate them. Reassemble the parts and screw the plug down hand tight. With this work done, you have completed the maintenance work on the Jake brake housing. The next section covers maintenance performed on the master piston pin and roller. The injector rocker arm contains a pin and roller for actuating the Jake brake master piston. If the roller is excessively worn or damaged, the injector rocker arm must be replaced. Pins and rollers are not available as service parts. Injector rocker arm assemblies are available from Detroit Diesel. Slide the rockers off the shaft. Wipe off the rocker arm roller assemblies by blowing them with compressed air, and be sure to wear eye protection. Disassemble the rocker arm shaft. Lay out each piece to help you reassemble them. Replace the injector arm with a new part. Remember that pins and rollers are not available from Jacobs as service parts. Injector rocker arm assemblies are available from Detroit Diesel with pins and rollers already installed. Reassemble the parts to the rocker shaft. Now the shaft is ready to be reinstalled on the engine. Note, be sure to reassemble rocker arms to the same position on the rocker shaft. Engines built prior to number 6R4455 have 5 8929607 internal hex screws. You must replace the exhaust position screws with number 8929751 external hex screws to provide a bearing surface for the Jake brake. Some engines built after number 6R4455 have 5 8929751 external screws. You must replace the intake position screws with number 8929607 internal hex screws to increase clearance. Later engines are built with the correct screws for a Jake brake. 2 part number 8929607 screws in the intake position and 2 part number 8929751 screws in the exhaust position. The injector can use either screw in a non-Jake brake application. Next, check the valve button and valve button retaining clip. To do this, you have to remove the valve adjuster screw from the rocker arm. You remove the screw by spreading the retaining clip with an expander and removing the button. The expander is part number J37347. Jacobs does not, however, provide replacement adjustment screws. They are available from Detroit Diesel Corporation. First, adjust the expander to limit the amount of travel of the valve button retaining clip to not more than 15.5 millimeters or 610 thousandths. Slide the retaining clip open end first down the adjuster screw. You have to spread the clip slightly with the expander so that the open end can pass over the ball head of the adjuster screw. Insert the groove on the valve button into the legs of the retaining clip. Remove the expander and hold the legs of the retainer with your thumb and index finger. Press the valve button towards the screw to seat both legs of the retainer completely in the groove. Reinstall the screw in the rocker arm assembly and slide the assembly back onto the rocker arm shaft. Now you can install the rocker shaft assembly back on the engine. This completes the maintenance portion of this program. We will now discuss non-Jake brake ready engines. For non-Jake brake ready engines, there are several important points for you to keep in mind. Series 60 12.7 liter Detroit diesel engines with serial numbers lower than 6R4455 will not be equipped with parts required for Jake brake installation. The following parts must be replaced before you install the Jake brake. Note, the exhaust rocker arm adjusting screws must have the rounded top surface shown on the left for slave piston crosshead contact. The injector rocker arms must have pins and rollers to operate the master piston. They are factory installed by Detroit Diesel. The camshaft bearing caps have a larger pad area in order to support the Jake brake housing. The procedure for the new cam bearing cap is done by cloning. Consult your local Detroit Diesel distributor. To install these various parts, you have to remove the rocker arm assemblies as previously demonstrated in this film. To install the pins and rollers into the injector rocker arms, use an arbor press. Press the pin so that it is flush with the rocker arm on both ends. The pin can be pressed into the rocker arm one time only. If replacement of the pin or roller becomes necessary, the rocker arm assembly must be replaced. You paid close attention to detail when installing and maintaining the jake brake. You checked each step. As a result, you have given the truck a powerful retarding device for keeping the vehicle under control, and you have given the driver increased confidence. You can now take satisfaction in a job well done.